We know that Keane had his own troubles and he was young and naive enough maybe to fall into with some of the wrong people, not knowing or anticipating the dire consequences. And I hope that his death will be a warning to other young lads who are unfortunately being groomed by criminals with the promise of money and gifts that will inevitably end in tragedy and death.
Yo, this is the Scarcity Studios YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And our sponsors are Alpha Claims and Hire Birmingham, the leading and best accident management company. Get a replacement car anywhere in 1 hour. I really appreciate you joining me today, and this story comes from Ireland. There's some breaking news and there's a lot that I want to talk about in this video. It has taken 4 days for me to actually even find out the news that has emerged from Ireland. And this is due to a new law that has came into effect. I say a new law. It's an old law that they didn't realise had such wide-ranging effects. The Garda believe they have found the remains of Keane Woods in a Drogheda search in County Louth. They say they have discovered skeletal remains in a shallow grave, which they believe belongs to the murdered teenager. They say they are confident they belong to the 17-year-old who was brutally killed and beheaded in January last year. Thursday's discovery made halfway down a deep ravine behind the Rathmullen Park housing estate in Drogheda, County Louth, and only a couple of hundred yards away from the house that the police said the murder occurred. Forensic and DNA tests will be carried out to confirm that they are the human remains of missing Keane, and more than 40 police officers took part in the search that covers waste ground and underground tunnels that run down into the River Boyne. However, detectives say the remains were buried in a shallow grave halfway down the hill, and sophisticated electronic equipment to find it, after being told to search a specific area after a tip-off. The Gardai source said, "We found the remains yesterday. We are confident that they belong to the teenager, and we acted on intelligence and found the remains. The torso is the only part of the body that was missing and never found. And they are also looking for murder weapons, phones and other evidence, being as no one was ever convicted of the murder of Keane." The whole area was sealed off and the search will continue again on Friday. It is understood the family of the teenager were informed that his remains were found and were very upset but relieved. The teenager's severed limbs were dumped in Coolock and Drumcondra to what the police said at the time was to warn off rival criminals. His funeral and burial went ahead when he still had missing body parts. And the Garda said the young man was executed in a drug feud in the Drogheda area. Some of the boy's friends gathered at the crime scene along with local residents, and one woman said that it was shocking that they'd found his body chopped up and dumped all over the place. Hopefully now they can find his missing remains and his family can have some peace. In the whole investigation, the police have arrested 8 people, but they've only actually charged 1, and that is only with not telling them anything about what happened in that house. And he's 47 years old, and in Irish news now, they can't even name somebody that may even be connected to a case in case they could identify the child. So they've conveniently made it very difficult for the press to actually do their job. If they had known about this law at the time when Keane had died, we wouldn't have known what he looked like or even be able to say his name. There was an example recently in Irish media where a woman who lost her children tried to do an interview on RTE radio with Claire Byrne, and she could not even say her own name, refer to her children as being dead, or say their names, and also the person that killed them. So the Irish government have silenced the families of these murders.
Unfortunately, what it does is it anonymizes me and my children, and it protects the perpetrator. And that, I think, is the greatest injustice in something like this, is that it protects the perpetrator. We're normal people and we're relying on the justice system to protect us. And unfortunately, in this country, it doesn't always. Our legacy to our children, if you like, is their names.
And in the case of Keane Woods, it was such a massive story and such a heartbreaking story, and it affected so many young kids. I think that story would have made to think again about what they're doing, has changed some children's lives in some way or another. However brutal and devastating it was, it definitely had an effect that I think was positive in some ways. And if the Irish government had stopped the press from being able to say their name, then I don't think Keane's name would have lived on for as long as it has. The act that I'm referring to is called the Children's Act. It actually goes back to 2001, and it's only following recent events that they realised that this act actually does stop naming children that have been killed in the press. And politicians in Ireland are going to try to change this law as well, to try to correct it so that at least let the parents talk if they wish to. Because there should definitely be rules around the family definitely should have a say on what the press talk about. They should work very closely with the family. But at the same time, if it's of public interest and of importance as well, which I believe Keane's case was, it was a drug-related case that showed exactly what was going on in the area. And some of the headlines at the time were very revealing in relation to what was happening. They said that the killers filmed themselves dismembering the 17-year-old and shared it on social media. And the papers reported at the time the police were trying to find a psychotic Dublin hitman that they believe was responsible. We were sent the video, I think it was on the same day that this happened, and it was one of the hardest stories that I actually covered in the years that I've been doing this. Officers believe Keane was taken to a house in Drogheda overnight and his body parts were dumped in two parts of Dublin late on Monday and Wednesday. Investigators went with the theory that they believed that Keane Woods was killed in a revenge for a gangland slaying of Richie Carberry in November 2019. Carberry was shot multiple times as he stood outside the gates of his home in Bettystown, having survived the previous hit a month before. Police were investigating the possibility that Keane was murdered because he had links to the gang that was responsible for that. And it later emerged as well of the video of a confrontation with Robbie Lawler. And Robbie Lawler would later go on to be murdered in Belfast when he was shot dead outside Adrian Holland's house in the city. Patrick Tia, 45 years old, was refused bail and arrested and charged over his alleged role in the murder of Robbie Lawler, who was the prime suspect in the murder of Keane Woods. Lawler, 36, was shot dead in broad daylight on April the 4th. According to the police, a gunman emerged from a house that was owned by Adrian Holland in Etna Drive in the Ardoyne area of Belfast, and they opened fire several times. Lawler died at the scene after being shot in the head and body, and the police would later release a statement to say he was heavily involved in bitter disputes in Drogheda-based factions, and he was linked to the abduction and killing of the 17-year-old in January of last year. They heard in court that Lawler may have travelled to Northern Ireland because he feared he was going to be attacked. Detectives believe he went to the scene of his killing in a pre-arranged appointment to collect some money. The unidentified gunman then escaped in one of two cars spotted in the area and burnt out a short time later. Patrick Tier of Thornbury Hill in Belfast and Holland were charged as part of a joint enterprise based on their involvement in events surrounding the killing. Evidence in the case centres on telephone cell site analysis and ANPR. They both went no comment in police interviews when asked about the murder of Robbie Lawler. And later on, Tia would change his mind and say that he wishes to give an account. The council submitted that the police have limited powers to interview someone that has already been charged, and there is absolutely nothing they can do to prevent the accused from providing a written account to his solicitor, and both of them were remanded in custody to appear in court at a later date. So this is a surprising development because a lot of people didn't think they would ever find the remains of Keane Woods. And also a reminder as well, from the way this story ended. We followed this story from the very beginning, from the day that it happened, up until the moment that Robbie Lawler passed away. And the police said there was no longer looking for anyone in relation to the murder of Keane Woods. And I'm sure a lot of people watching this story as well can relate to him from being a child that was caught up in a lot of different trouble. And I hope that he's made some children think more about life and how precious the time that we have is. So I really appreciate you joining me for this update, and happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow for the Irish subscribers as well. I'd really appreciate it if you join me again later with some more news as well. And please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Rest in peace to Keane Woods.
So that's some bad news.